So there's a long history behind why Netflix isn't going to make an Apple Vision Pro app. And I think that it starts with this computer. Now, this Mac was the first Mac that my family got. Life-changing for me at the time. I was into video, it had iMovie, I knew how good of an app iMovie was. And I remember sitting there for hours over the summer that we got this device. The Mac had been around for decades at that point, longer than I'd been alive. But I remember just how fundamentally knowing that this computer had an app that I wanted made me want the computer itself. The thing is that when Steve Jobs announced the Mac, when he was designing the original Macintosh with a small team at Apple, he knew just how important it was to have a killer app like that.
The telephone, we look at the telephone and we're really impressed with the telephone because it was the first and really the only desk appliance. To be a desk appliance, you have to do something really useful, and you have to be really easy to use so people don't have to spend a lot of time learning how to use this thing. And you have to be really cheap. And we don't think there's been a desk appliance since the telephone. And what we want to do is make Macintosh the second desk appliance.
My family made fun of me for drinking orange juice and coffee together, but I think they're coming around. Now, the Vision Pro was launched at WWDC last year, the Worldwide Developer Conference, Apple's developer conference that they put on every year. They launched the Vision Pro there, and in the introductory video, they spent equal time on two applications for the device. They spent 5 minutes on work and 5 minutes on entertainment. So work and entertainment were the applications, the end in mind that they had for this device. Interestingly, and also in a very Apple fashion, they've been very focused on those two categories in their marketing materials. In fact, in every one of their marketing materials, marketing videos actually, since then, where they've talked about the applications for the Vision Pro, they've spent almost an exactly equal amount of time talking about work and talking about entertainment. In their guidance video that they just released, in their introductory video, like I talked about, every single one, they've talked about work and entertainment. More recently, they've put out a press release talking about entertainment and given media hands-on time talking about those entertainment experiences. Now, Apple has always had some idea about the market that they're aiming for with their computers. I've said before, I'll say it again, early on, the Apple II is what made Apple Apple. It preceded the Mac. 1970s, they're there. It is the thing that made Apple Apple because they sold so many of them. And the market that device was aimed for was just computer hobbyists at the time. It was personal computers because that's all who was messing around with personal computers. It was just nerds. For the Mac, 1984, they thought that they would release that into the knowledge worker space. That was their target market, right? And that's how it's always worked with Apple. They make this really enticing product for enthusiasts. Enthusiasts tinker with that product, and then enthusiasts kind of get to work and start releasing apps and applications for that device, end products, things that have the end in mind that make the computer really useful. That's what they call a killer app. Now, for the Apple II, it was aimed at hobbyists. They thought they'd sell a ton of those things to hobbyists, which they did. But the hobbyists tinkered, and they made VisiCalc, that first killer app. And if you haven't watched the video from yesterday, watch the video from yesterday where I talk a little bit about that. That app alone, this first spreadsheet ever, sold the personal computer. It is what made the personal computer the personal computer. And Apple didn't expect it. They did not anticipate it. They thought they would sell to hobbyists, but they sold to small businesses. The Mac. They did their best to make a platform for people to build on, but it was difficult for developers to learn how to make apps that were no longer just for the command line, but instead for the graphical user interface, because it was an entirely new paradigm, right? So they thought they were catering to knowledge workers. That was their target market. But then desktop publishing came along, right? Um, it basically allowed Apple to sell those computers again to small businesses that wanted to make brochures and to make things like signs and brochures and posters and menus, things that you would have previously had to cobble together and ask a professional to do. It turned everyone into a publisher. So again, small businesses, artists were the market that it landed in when knowledge workers were the original target market that they were aiming for. And that's just how it works. Like I said, that is just how it works. The enthusiasts get their hands on it and they transform the market that that device is for. Now, the iPhone, it's just such an unusual product. It was a little different, right? Because it didn't launch as a platform where you could build on top of. In fact, the developer story for the iPhone originally was just the web. You were supposed to make web apps, and people were supposed to reach apps on the iPhone through the web. There was no native support on the phone to develop for originally. And while VisiCalc was the killer app for the Apple II, the spreadsheet, and while desktop publishing was the killer app for the Mac, the iPhone was kind of a killer app in itself. And that's because everybody was walking around at the time with a cell phone in their pocket, their wallet in their pocket, and an iPod in their pocket. And the wallet gets folded in later on, but originally when the phone was announced, it was announced as three things, right? Famously, Jobs announced it as a phone, a widescreen iPod, and a revolutionary device for accessing the internet. The phone part actually is what Jobs considered the killer app at the time, because it was just a better phone than all the other cell phones out there. It wasn't a terrible user interface. The iPod folded that into the touchscreen device, right? It was the best iPod they had ever made because they had this revolutionary input device that was multi-touch. And then, of course, the web. It was the first mobile device that kind of lets you take the web with you in your hand in a really meaningful way that didn't make it a headache to use. And so that combination alone was a killer app on its own. It was just a little appliance product. That's what an iPhone was. It was a little appliance to do those few things. And those three things alone, because it was just so much better than the competition in those alone, it was its own killer app. At least that's my perspective. Now, not too long after, Apple did try to take that lesson from the Mac and from the Apple II, which is that once you have a computing platform, it's best to let developers extend it because they are the ones who develop the things that make the killer apps that you could have never even thought of before. So really the killer app, in my opinion, that at least Apple made for their phone was not the phone, it was not the web, it wasn't the iPod, although those were the things that were needed to bootstrap things. It was the App Store, right? It was the portal through which it allowed developers, these hungry developers that wanted to make things, that were hacking on the iPhone, making Twitter clients before you could make anything for the iPhone, behind the scenes, backwards engineering this device because they were just so enthusiastic about the product. The same way it happened for the Mac, the same way it happened for the Apple II. They decided to harness that and do it for the iPhone. And they learned lessons by that point. They had learned that they considered the phone and the software on it the soul of the device and their intellectual property, and they wanted to monetize it. And so they decided that they wanted to take a cut, right? And this is kind of the famous debate about Apple's tax on the App Store. Now, developers don't get to put apps on the iPhone for free. First of all, you have to join the developer program, which costs money. But on top of that, you have to pay a certain percentage of the income that you get from the iPhone, the apps on the iPhone, to Apple itself. It's the 30% tax. It had been for a very long time, with exceptions here and there. Now, that's fine. Apple did a great job. They created a campaign for the iPhone called "There's an app for that," right? It was hugely successful. But the issue was that over time, as the phone became so popular, and as there became such a huge market for apps on the iPhone, that developers began to sour on the position of power that Apple had at the App Store level. And I think that this is the crux of why Netflix is not coming to the iPhone, because there's a long history of tit for tat battles back and forth with Netflix, with Spotify, with YouTube, with Amazon, with all these big names, along with all the smaller names. And if you're a consumer, maybe it's not super visible for you, but if you're in the sphere, or if you're a developer, you know just how much control Apple exerts over the phone as their platform. And they're taking the same philosophy and applying it to the Vision Pro. And people have learned their lesson. I want to do two more things before we bring this home. The first one is play you this clip from 2015 where Tim Cook is announcing an Apple TV, a new Apple TV, as a platform for apps.
The television experience has been virtually standing still while innovation has been thriving in the mobile space led by iPhone and iPad. Today, we are going to do something about that. And it starts with a vision, and our vision for TV is simple and perhaps a little provocative. We believe the future of television is apps.
Apple loved making so much money hand over fist through the app stores on the iPhone and on the iPad that they brought it to the TV. They also brought it to the watch and to an iMessage of all things, right? And they all kind of failed. Those three app stores really all kind of failed. Now, I also want to play you a couple of clips from the latest Accidental Tech podcast where John Siracusa talks about greed and pride and control. So just give this a listen really quick.
And that sense of pride and that sense of who are you to tell us how to run our business? It's our thing. We can charge for access to it. All right, there's that pride angle. And the other one is, again, related to the small number of people who tend to be older who run the company, is the recollection of what has happened to other companies that have lost essentially a linchpin of control. And having control over the iPhone platform, they sold billions and billions of iPhones. It's a huge platform. They control it. Giving up any part of that control, letting someone else make anything close to as much money as you make on that platform, they've seen technology companies make that mistake. Think of IBM, Microsoft, and Intel. If you don't know the history of those three companies and how power shifted among them at the dawn of the personal computing age and how it progressed, there's a lot of power shifts, mostly having to do with one company not realizing but thinking it wasn't a big deal, that they were giving up control, giving up a particular linchpin of control over their own future, not realizing they just opened the door for their competitor to come and suck all the value out of the platform that, quote unquote, they made, right? And I think a lot of people in a position of power at Apple think, not so much, those other factors are there, but another thing
You get the idea. So control is a huge deal here. Apple wants the control over things, but keeping control over the App Store and over their platform means that you're taking control from developers. This isn't the Apple II anymore. It isn't the Wild West. It's not even the Mac anymore. This is a new era of app distribution and control over distribution and what can be done on the platforms. Now, this obsession with control has led to some beef between Apple and the developers on the platform, big and small. Now, the iPhone was such a big opportunity that developers were willing to put up with some of that BS, right? But as things have gone on, Apple has kind of continued to exert this almost tyrannical control over the distribution mechanism for the apps. And actually, Netflix has been wrestling with that control with Apple for a long time. I mean, from what I remember, before the Apple TV had apps, one of the few apps on there was a Netflix app because they were there from the beginning. It made sense. It was for TV. It was on the TV. And of course, you open up the App Store on here, And yeah, I can find a Netflix app. I mean, maybe Tim Cook was right. Maybe the future was apps. But Apple's also gone back on that because, again, they had control. They have control over their platform. They have claimed over and over again that apps are the future, and then they went back on that, and they went to this new form where the TV app was, and so different apps vend their content to it, like Hulu or Disney Plus or HBO Max, you name it. You can access all of them, but not Netflix, because Netflix wants control over the experience that their users have. So an app is, they're not willing to give up even more control to Apple. They're going to maintain the very little that they have. Now, let me play you this second clip from Accidental Tech Podcast. Again, John Siracusa.
And I have to think that is also one of the factors. And so it's a stew. Pride, wise, history-informed, strategic attitude of like, we need to retain this control, and we have to show growth, and this is the area that's growing because we're the different part of the S-curve and all our other product lines. And those all combine to make them downgrade the severity of the things that are happening negatively. I don't think they are totally like oblivious to them. I think they do see the strategy tax, the costs. I think they don't like the scammy games. They see all of that, but they feel like they can mitigate those. If we just have a better app store policies, if we try to keep the worst of the games out of there, if we pursue other avenues, if we make new products like the Vision Pro, like we just have to kind of hold the line, mitigate the bad stuff, and deal with any of the fallout. Oh, Epic's not our thing. That's not such a big deal. We'll just have Unity be the 3D engine of choice for Vision Pro. What did you say about Unity? How are they doing? What did they do? What? Maybe we should talk to... Oh, we can't really talk to Epic. And see NVIDIA with the GPUs. Anyway, there are lots of things that they did that sort of were strategically like in service of maintaining their control over the platform, and the negatives that happen, like, that's not that big a deal. They see the negative. They don't see that it's, they know it's there. Like they would rather have Fortnite on their platform than not, but they're not willing to pay that price. So like, we can weather that storm. After all, how big a deal could it be if we anger Epic? And it could be that.
So there you have it. Apple has angered lots of people, and Netflix is one of those groups. Netflix doesn't want to pay 30% to Apple. They don't want to pay 15% to Apple. So you can't go onto the Netflix app on your phone or on your TV and sign up for a subscription because Apple wants to have just that much control over it. They just lost a Supreme Court case over the fact that they are not willing to give up control. Likewise, Netflix wants control over their experience. And so what does the Apple Vision Pro and visionOS represent to Netflix? It represents more work to develop for another platform. It represents a low volume opportunity relatively compared to TVs and phones and computers and the web. And it also represents the risk of another long, protracted battle with Apple. And so that's why Netflix isn't coming to visionOS. Because really, why would these companies, and to be fair, why would pretty much any developer want to develop for this platform that may just be taking advantage of them and is extracting value out of them without giving much back? And I think that's the ultimate question. Is the exchange going to be fair? And has Apple made a good enough product that the enthusiasts will be the ones to bootstrap the App Store and make the next killer app?